it's not about staying interested. It's just kind of like keeping that joy you have for it sort of fresh with new people, with more collaborations, with more connections.
Hello, print friends, and welcome. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. Each week, I chat with artists who use print-based media to do something beyond the expected. This is a bilingual podcast, so if you subscribe to us, you'll be getting episodes in English with me, as well as in Spanish with Ronaldo Gil Zambrano. Together, we speak to printmakers around the globe about their practice and passions in the world of printmaking. Hello, Print Friend is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, currently offering possibly the best thing to happen to relieve printmaking, their Woodzilla presses. These beautifully made presses come from the Netherlands, and they're uniquely engineered to perfectly combine superior craftsmanship and performance at a price that makes them accessible whether you're a seasoned printmaking pro or new to the craft. They're available across 5 sizes, and each Woodzilla press is precisely manufactured from heavy-duty steel and designed to apply uniform pressure without undue work or stress for the artist, and still guaranteeing a beautifully printed result at every reveal. Check out these beauties through the link in the show notes. My guest this week is John Coe, founder of Pressing Matters magazine, the most beautiful and accessible publication in the contemporary print world. We talk about the how and the why of founding the magazine, how he selects his features, and his physical publication surviving and thriving in the digital world. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to turn the pages with John Coe. Hi, John. How's it going?
I'm good, thanks, Miranda. How are you?
I'm really good. I feel like our meeting feels like a long time coming to me, because it's not just I haven't just known your work and what you do and consumed it and been a fan of it, but we've actually collaborated a little bit. I've written for Pressing Matters. I wrote a piece years ago on Elizabeth Jean Yance, and working on a piece right now that'll come out in the last issue of 2022. And so it's really nice to have worked together and then to actually be able to see you semi in person and have a chat.
Absolutely. It's I wrote down rather than remembered that we featured you in May 2017, which was relatively.
Oh my gosh. That's
relatively,
so long ago.
No, that's wrong. That was the first issue came out in May 2017. We featured you in issue 6, which is quite a special issue. So it had lots of people like John Pedder in it. I think Stanley Donwood in that issue as well. Loads of people in issue 6. It was such a good issue.
Very cool.
Yeah, no, it has been. It's been great. Sort of connecting with a lot of people this year as well. Just doing 3 issues this year, I've had a bit more chance to actually meet some people in person, get some print fairs, things like that. So
very fun.
Yeah.
Very fun. Well, before we get into the interview, would you introduce yourself and just let people know who you are, where you are, what you do?
Sure. So I'm John Coe. I'm creative director, founder of Pressing Matters magazine. Set it up, as I just said, 6 years ago, I think, to do a magazine about printmaking. I, at the time, felt there wasn't something that was speaking to me about print, and that's where it came from. So I did a year in print, which was a part-time course, a morning a week for a year, and it was in all kinds of print formats. So you did like 3 or 4 weeks in different print mediums. So you do relief print and you do a bit of screen print, etc. And whilst I was doing that, I met Jo Hounsome, who is sort of could call our house photographer. She doesn't do all of it, but she's local to Bristol. She was the tutor of that course. And I did that classic thing of talking about it so much, I was winding me and her up about get this magazine started, right?
Yeah.
It just felt I knew a lot of people with interesting stories, just in our local area, let alone anywhere else. And prior to that magazine, I'd done another magazine called Bone Shaker, which I'll show you on screen, but not anyone else will be able to see it.
Oh, beautiful. So a cycling magazine.
Similar, yeah, it was about cycling, smaller format, and there was a group of us who did that. And I had some experience working at a magazine company in Germany on an indie label sort of magazine. And so I had all this experience. I wasn't going to do anything, and I'm self-taught in graphic design over the years in different jobs, etc., as a freelancer as well. But one thing I knew I was pretty engaged with, I guess, or interested in was magazines. I bought loads of magazines, just a massive magazine fan, let alone what it was about. At the time I was quite a cyclist. A lot of my friends were into cycling as well. So, yeah, a group of us came together and did that magazine. And I wasn't going to do another magazine, but when I decided to do the printmaking course, I sort of was like, well, the artwork is, the people's print artwork,
Mm-hmm.
the illustration. Like, so for example, with the bike magazine, we'd have to commission illustration for a store. Whereas magazine, it's the people's artwork. And most people I was speaking to had like friends who were photographers or someone who wanted to write something. So literally the second I mentioned it locally, people were like, oh, I'll do something. I want to see it. I did like a little PDF and had a few sort of, what do you reckon on this idea with a few people? But past that, I was pretty convinced, because I'd done other magazines, that I would just go for it, do issue one, put my own money behind it, just get it done, get it over the line. It might be the same with the podcast or like other projects you've done. But I think sometimes when you put your own self, your ideas and your money behind something and go like, meet me halfway, it sometimes can come across better than crowdfunding things or like from the start having a different relationship. So it came out fairly fully formed, and seems like a long time ago now, 6 years, and I've got a lot of design files between now and then. So
yeah, I feel like when I first saw Pressing Matters in 2017, I even, kind of think of it, I can't even remember how I was introduced to it, but I saw it, and that idea of it being fully formed, I mean, that really speaks to me of my experience.
Yeah.
So, getting this magazine and it just feeling like it just filled this niche that was out there in the print community and the way in which the global print community has a shared narrative and communicates with one another. Because as we spoke to a little bit off air, there are other publications about printmaking, but a lot of them are quite academic. And, that's a whole another side of the print world, which is important and doing its own good work. But something that just seems like a lush, visually driven celebration with stories that don't need 30 footnotes. Like, this can just be a good story about printmaking without that sort of justification of, making sure we're referencing all these people. And so I instantly connected with it. And I come across it about the same time I was thinking about starting the podcast. And I felt like it had a similar energy to it. And so that was really cool to see, this idea that printmaking stories are interesting in and of themselves. And there'll be people who want to respond to them.
Yeah.
And if we create something that is accessible, people will come. If you build it, they will come.
Yeah. I think we always said with Bone Shakers magazines, if there was any sort of vague tagline, it was like a sideways look at cycling. It was like not about the lycra and the kit. It was about the human stories, the endeavour. And again, we talked a little bit off air about, I think printmaking's, it's all about artistic endeavour and the sort of journey people go on from just that first sketch to, how would this look in lino cut, or what's the best way to print this, or what have you. I think within the pages of the magazine, I realised very quickly, even the first couple of issues, and I guess through the community online, we're interested because it's other people, but there's also universality in other people's stories that we can connect to. So when I started, I was trying to push slightly, not against, but be in a different space to those academic journals. So I was like, the ones we have in the UK are often like, the photos are almost postage stamp size. They're very small, the work is very small, and it's all words. And I think we still have plenty of words in ours, but I was massively trying to just go, that print's amazing. Like, especially if you see these things in real life, they're quite big, smaller than big on, and if it's on a glossy paper or something like that, then, so I guess coming from it from a graphic design point of view, from a like, what do I want to see? It's kind of selfish from the from the start point.
Yeah.
Was just like, well, let's just make, like you say the word lush, but let's just make this speak of its own qualities, if you see what I mean. So, I mean, I get millions of photos for most photo shoots, and I have to just go work through them. But usually the work is easier to choose because I can go, well, that one really stands up as a whole page and this doesn't. And so, I think what I'm always mindful of is just, like, I have my own sort of thoughts and feelings when we interview people, when we write, when I design it. But I think it's quite likely from the conversations I've had with people that you can be a stone litho artist, but still be really interested in screen printing or this other approach, or, people's practices. I've noticed this massively in Bristol, actually. Like, a lot of people's practices cross over, and they'll actually be a person who looks at trees, or like Gemma looks at old buildings and things like Gemma Gunning.
Yeah.
And she is predominantly litho, but she will work in other methods. So even her drawings are amazing. And so you've got, I think the actual techniques can be a bit amorphous, and I am very much, have we covered everyone in some kind of way? Because I want it to be fair, and for someone, whatever they're looking at, to get something from it. But you'd be surprised at print fairs, often people are going, which one's your screen printing issue? I'm like, just pick them up, look at them, see what work you like, because it could be a screen printing article, but they don't like that particular type of artwork. So it's, I think for some people it's possibly a bit like all over the shop, but I think we do work quite hard to make it, quite an open thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of the reason why I really connect with it, is that it does cover the breadth of this community that is at the same time very large and very small. Yeah. And so, and you get that, you'll get an article about Black women of print, and then you'll get the next, turn the page, and it'll be a profile on this Brazilian woodcut artist who's, in his 90s. And then you'll turn the page and it'll be a stamp collection. It's really fun that way. And so, at the beginning, it sounds like when you were looking at, making content, it was, resourcing kind of the people in your network. But of course, it's grown now. You say you're coming up on 20 issues. What does it look like now when you're putting a magazine together? Are you getting pitches from people around the world? Are you soliciting? Are you researching and writing yourself? How does, now that we've been doing this for 6 years, how does it look for you to create an issue?
Well, the last 2 or 3 issues have been maybe slightly different to the ones before, because I had some treatment for my health earlier in the year. And so it's not getting them out by hook or by crook, but we have always got plenty of content. We've always got plenty of people we're speaking to, and sometimes stories can overlap. So we start one, but it doesn't manage to finish in time for a print deadline, or, once someone's on a residency and they won't have time to do part of it, and it'll be a better story later. So I think the more recent ones building up to issue 20 have been almost had their own momentum. Like, there's been people who wanted to feature. It all felt well for us. And but the only one thing I would say, in my own personal opinion, is, sometimes the magazine can be quite profile heavy. So even though we'll do different profiles, they can be different sort of artists. It can be sort of like, here's someone else in the studio, here's someone. And the one thing I am doing, looking at issue 20, is looking back almost to the earlier issues, or things we've done along the way. So some of like the My Tools articles, more feature-led pieces where it's sketchbook behind the print, or the story behind the print, sorry, and from sketchbook to print. There's a couple of new ones we're doing, like a city in print. So Gemma Gunning talked about, or she's doing a piece about Bristol and how it inspires her. And I'd love, like, her to do that one, and then someone go, oh yeah, I'm based in Mexico City. There's loads going.
Yeah.
And so I think as we keep going, we're trying to strengthen up the kind of things we're good at, but also look back a little bit and go, well, that worked, and that was kind of really enjoyable. Like, the longer you go, the more we feel, the more we want to get many voices. So working with yourself on some articles, like you've worked over in Thailand, the guys over there, the article is brilliant because of that. And so there's quite a few in 20. I think, again, I want everyone else to be the judge of it when it comes out, but for me it's different because we've got like, so Jade Garfield, a woodcut artist, has interviewed Tom Hammock, who's also a woodcut artist and painter. Their conversation is really interesting because it's exactly that, and they touch on sort of nuances that I wouldn't necessarily get to because I'm busy making a magazine. So I think, if I was to summarize all of that rambling, it's trying to learn from all the good stuff over the years, but also trying to incorporate as much of the community that's saying, hey, I'm here, I've got a story, and actually, reaching out to them, say, yeah, well, like you say, I wouldn't call it a pitch. You get different, like with yourself, like you've come to us and said, well, there's several things going on. I'm interested, but actually, this is something I could see in the pages of the magazine. And that's quite different to an artist emailing us saying, here's my artwork, can you feature it? That's correct. So we sort of get both.
Yeah.
And I quite like that. But I think certainly in each issue, I'm mindful that we get sent a lot. For example, we get sent a lot more relief artwork.
Of course. Yeah, I can see that.
And we would Intaglio or even Riso, other things that I think it's quite key to sort of keep in there because they are part of this world. So, yeah, for example, this issue is, I would say, half kind of lots of people's voices, different approaches, and then half profiles. But even within the profiles, the actual artists are quite varied again. Which is quite, I mean, for me, it's like, and I'm also playing with other things. I may end up with another photographic cover, but I am playing around with an illustrated cover this time, so it's, I want to, obviously the longer I go on, I'm sure it's the same with the podcast or any projects that anyone does over a longer period of time. It's not about staying interested. It's just kind of like keeping that joy you have for it sort of fresh with new people, with more collaborations, with more connections.
Totally. And for me with the podcast, part of it too is about keeping myself challenged in some way, because you don't ever want to, at least I don't ever want to get to the point where I'm like, I have this down. I know how this works. I do this interview, then it looks like this, then it looks like this, then it's the finished product. And that sort of like stay hungry, mentality disappears a bit. And so, you need to, especially when, like you said, was multi-year, like the podcast was 2018, Pressing Matters is 2017. So they're, sort of reaching a similar age, and where it could start to feel comfortable if you don't, but you need to like not let it feel comfortable. That's how I feel anyway. Yeah.
I keep mistakenly saying 20 years instead of 20 issues, which is completely, is that saying something about it? No. I mean,
it's felt so long. Yeah.
It's really exciting. It's really exciting that it was fairly popular from the start. We reprinted issue 1, we did 1,000, we had to print another 1,000 quite quickly. And so, I mean, you're going back to what you were saying, small and big thing. I sort of jokingly call it a global niche, but I think that is what it is. Like a lot of people who aren't here sort of going, you can make a living off of this, and I'm like, yeah, kinda, yeah. It's because I'm not trying to do it like millions of things, and we haven't got millions of employees. It's a very small scale business. I work with my wife on the sort of more logistics side of things. Work with a writer, some regular photographers, but it's me. Podcast is this huge side of the business that is me. And so the way it looks, I suppose, for this issue is, and certainly I work quite closely with Vinca on when we choose what's in it and how we approach things. Vinca Power is our brilliant writer, and I think we're both interested in journalism and magazines and storytelling. That's just, the design is really important. I am a designer, but there's a side to just telling people stories, and she's brilliant at bringing through those sort of red threads and sort of tying it all together. And sometimes it's sort of like given to us, we do a Q&A, we're given all the high-res artwork, that we need, and it's all just packaged lovely. and then other times, you work harder for them, but sometimes that's down to us because we think it could be better, or we can, and I have over the years, I think at the start I was quite sort of like, just try and fit everyone in at some point. I do challenge people and say, well, look, if you're doing this show later in the year, why don't we talk to you after you've had that, because you'll have grown as an artist, or, maybe put you in as a smaller piece or an ad now, but then revisit it. And I think with that longevity comes the opportunity to just say, we are kind of backed up on content often.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've got like a list. I think I saw on Instagram today all the people you're only talking to this week or something. Like, sounds like my world. It is. It's sort of managing all those things and keeping it, on a day-to-day basis, is quite enjoyable. And I think for me this year, especially with all the health stuff happening, I just want to be actually connected with people more. It was quite nice during if there was any nice thing about the pandemic, but actually the Zooms were really good because people were really like, oh, I want to chat to someone.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of it can be done by just Q&As or giving people some themes to write on. And so, connection with actual people, that's important to me. And coming up, we've got quite a few print fairs in the UK, which is a nice opportunity, obviously, to sell a few mags, but also, as much as anything else, just sort of catch up with people.
Yeah. That would be wonderful. I'm the lead on Print Santa Fe, which is going to have a print fair element to it.
Yeah.
It'd be great if we could somehow, it'd be wonderful if you could come visit, although I know that's quite the trip, but if we could even like have a table that we could have like a volunteer at, like moving some of the magazines.
When is it?
It's April 2023. So maybe. I don't know. I'm just sort of thinking this is.
I absolutely can't commit to anything.
Yeah, exactly. You're like.
What, we do have an issue coming out in April, though. So one thing I'm kind of mindful of is making more of like the launches. So sometimes they just sort of nothing happens, and sometimes something happens, and we've got our next one comes out mid-October. We're doing a festival called Print in Action in Plymouth in November, but then we're also doing Woolwich Print Fair and then Press and Play in Brighton in November, and they'll be sort of launch-ish because they're around the time. But in January, February time, we're hoping to do a tabletop fair in Bristol, curated by us, alongside a lino print show curated by Ben Dixon. So, it's nice to have sort of things a little arm's length away to be excited about and to, like you say, sort of bringing it to life. Like, I can't do loads more than I do because it's already a full-time job, but I think the more you connect with people in the actual real world, I've often met people who go, oh, well, I quite like putting on events, so I'll help. Or but when you do it, digitally or via, computer a lot of the time, those sort of personal connections, aren't as strong. So I'm all about that next year. So you never know. You may find me on a plane to Santa Fe.
We would love to host you. We'd love to host you. And the thing is that there's so many print events happening in the US, almost seems like every week, particularly in that like springtime area. So, you could do, Print Austin, SGCI, Print Santa Fe. You could just like make it this like the tour. So we'll see. I'm sure we'll talk.
And also, we've got such a great relationship with a lot of companies, particularly in the US, Speedball. I know you guys do with the podcast, and they've invited us out to some of their shows and things that they're at as well. So, I think that's it for me. The longer we go, the more I just want to personally strengthen these things as much as like doing via the magazine, just actually, connect with people and see how we can do more things like the fairs in the UK. We're already given, we've got inks from Speedball, and Algami are sending us some stuff, and
nice.
GF Smith, we're using their papers on our live printing as well as the Algami ones. So, it's sort of like the tentacles are growing.
Totally. I'm curious about the, sort of like the publishing industry in sort of a broad term, in the sense that it, of course, has massively changed with the internet. That there were, I think, at one point, countless niche interest niche trade magazines,
Sure.
like Chess Weekly and, Embroiderers Anonymous or whatever it is, right? And a lot of that, went away, of course, with the internet when people started to be able to connect in this digital sphere. And so when you go about, taking on a publication, whether it's the cycling magazine, or of course the printmaking magazine now, what is it that you think kind of makes it viable, like makes Pressing Matters something that people are like, oh, this is something that I'm not getting from the internet. This is something that it makes it a viable publication because it's adding something that the internet experience doesn't have.
Yeah, I mean, one short answer would be that it's a physical object and it's static, so it's not moving in front of you, and you're not making that sort of swipe action that makes a lot of content just go by in a very sort of primal image based way. And we probably need a bit of that sometimes too. But yeah, I mean, I guess magazines, as much as sort of books or art, coffee table art books, they're sort of, it's like not slow journalism, but they are ones like ours that are quarterly are, particularly about the arts in some kind of way. They are a little bit of a stake in the ground for like what's going on at the time. Now, I'm very mindful that that's sort of me and Vinca and a couple of other people's take on that, but quite a few thousand people buy the magazine, so it must be interesting to a few others. So yeah, there's that sort of feeling that, because I suppose the way we've done it, the way we've looked at it, is that we will talk about some shows and some fairs and things like that, but we keep sort of the dates out of it in the main articles. So we make it quite timely, so you can pick up an issue from cut 2 or 3 years ago and it's still quite a valued resource. I mean, when I started it, I didn't think of it as like a teaching tool, but the amount of people who run little workshops or even big workshops and say, oh yeah, we get it in for our students, and they love it because they can just, palm through it and go, oh yeah, no, it's a bit like that, the thing I'm trying to do, or, so I think differently to, say, the cycling magazine, when we came out, there weren't that many indie cycling magazines. By the time it was finishing up, like Rafa, the bike company, various other people had made their versions of it, and so it was quite saturated. And I dare say something will be equally as good looking as Pressing Matters at some point and have things to say and occupy that world too. But trying not to ramble this answer, but I suppose the way I feel about it is that, like, so financially it's doable because it's mainly me doing it, right? So when we were doing the bike magazine, like, there were 3, 4, 5 people at a certain time and we were all trying to get some kind of part-time wage from it, and it just becomes slightly bloated as far as, not, it was great working with all those people, but it was like quite hard to do. And I think with what I do, it's about getting this balance of like how much value there is in the thing that, like you say, isn't on the internet just passing by, it's captured somehow, but that then in 3 or 4 months' time, a new one will come that isn't vastly different. There's a familiarity there, but that there's some other artists, and that there's a slightly different take on a technique or what have you. I will say though, whether this is part of your question, I can't remember, but I will say particularly Instagram and the internet has been very good. It still is good now, but particularly at the start, like, there was already a community. Now, some people say, oh yeah, it brought together the community, the magazine did, and the Instagram account, things like, well, maybe it has, but I think it was there already. It was just sort of a glue that the magazine, because we're sort of, and we were with the bike mag, fairly open doors, like, yeah, you could be in this. We've just, we've got to have a conversation with you, particularly with these Instagram-led print challenges and things like that. I want people to feel part of it. Yeah. I think that is quite unique to our magazine, and a lot of magazines are full of ads, and a lot of magazines are financially driven. And I have worked at a couple of places like that, and I've bought magazines like that, and I think it all adds up to what I like and want to do is, coming back to what we were saying before, just tell sort of people's creative stories and get other people fired up by them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love what you're saying about that accessibility and that kind of open door feeling. And I didn't realize, but that's definitely part of what I connect with, is that it's equally thrilling for me to pick up an issue, or to, when the issues arrive in the mail is essentially how it happens. And I open the mailbox and I'm like, oh, there it is. There's that, just that kind of thrill of getting something in the mail. And then, I think also the delayed gratification, which we don't have, in any other like aspect of our life anymore. But like, you have to like wait for the issue to come. And then when it comes, like it's this buildup and this exciting moment. And I get equally excited learning about someone new as seeing a friend in it. Like, oh, there's Yakub, there's Woonjin, there's Latoya. It's so exciting to see your friend, your print friend in print,
Yeah. And it's quite, don't forget that, the invention of the Heidelberg press was massive for communication of media. Print has been really important to getting stories out there for a very long time. And I think we get so many pictures of people with their cup of tea when it comes out, and they're like, I'm carving some time, and and I'm like, kind of, I'm on holiday, and it was the first thing I packed, and I feed off that excitement, and I do get that excitement when I'm making it as well. It's like, I think we talked about it off air beforehand. It's interesting for me because I'm involved in all levels of the production, then the promotion, etc. As soon as it's out, it's everyone else's, the mag, and I don't like that with the podcast, but it's everyone else's to have, to enjoy. And I pick up on, in person at print fairs, or, some comments online or what have you, when people are excited about it. But, the schedule is such that you sort of, it's a weird one where you're thinking about 21 when 20's only come out and all that kind of stuff, which is, it's just how it is, because you're sort of, you're making something with that, schedule, and I kind of like it about it, but then it's just, when I get the magazine back, I think it's quite different, because I get many copies. I get them and they smell. Everyone goes, "Oh, they smell really amazing of ink," and I'm like, "Yeah, try having about 400 and like getting high off of the fumes until they calm down." But when I get it back, I'm just going, "Is there an error? Is there anything wrong with it?" It's kind of, that's just like any project you would work on as a creative person. You're sort of quite critical of it, and there's something in most issues, and I could probably list them, but you have to, you also have to be a bit zen about it and go, well, like, it's pretty good though. It's still good. There's a lot of good stuff in there, and usually it's only like tiny little typographic things or what have you, but we try our hardest to check everything over and over again and make sure there's no printer errors, and but it is that's the, some people just don't do print, they just do PDF magazines and things like that, and I get a few. I get a really great one called Contemporary Collage magazine, but the PDFs sit on my desktop until I've got time, and then I screen so much, I'm like, do I want to sit there and read this? Do I print it out? Like, it's like,
I can't connect with reading online like that. Like, it's just, and maybe it's being an 80s baby, and so like just not growing up with digital reading at all. But there's something that feels, because we do it so rarely now, connecting with magazines in this way. Most people do anyway. There's something that feels so like a little ritualistic kind of treat about reading a magazine, is where like I'm not in front of a screen. I've like set this time aside, and you say, you have your cup of tea or coffee, and you're sitting there and you're like, I'm going to just have an experience that has this sort of special feeling. And then also kind of this, there's something about the set aside time and the time limited experience, where I'm experiencing Instagram several times a day, almost like unconsciously. I'm like, oh, there's a moment of boredom in the grocery store. Like and now I'm consuming art. But, but But yeah, with the magazine, it's this little, it's like a ritual, and it feels really good.
I
Yeah.
mean, I do the same thing. I recently spotted a new magazine, which I think was PDF, and it's become print, called Adventure, which is about camper vans. I've got a camper van, and
Oh, nice.
maybe because we haven't been away in it so much this year, I'm a bit like, oh, I want to go away. But the thing is, in that world, you can get really sucked into sort of conversion videos and like how you could use solar better and like quite geeky.
Yeah.
Or you get people who are just like living the absolute dream life, very Instagram ready. And this magazine's actually like, so I did swaps. I swapped a couple of my mags with his, and I did exactly that. I put the kettle on, I sat down, I went, right, but no one bothered me for a bit.
Yeah.
I had that same kind of moment, and obviously I don't necessarily have it with my own one because I'm making sure it's all right and good, and but with a lot of other magazines, I'm like, and I guess for me as well, it's slightly homework based. It's like more I read other magazines and more like, oh, I like what they did there. They were sort of quite geeky and talked quite technically there, but they did it in a non like mission statement boring way, in a kind of quite useful way. Like, and I mean, I think that's the other thing with the magazines I particularly like, this, I recently got one called Crafts magazine, which I hadn't had before, but Huck magazine's always been a big one for me, which is all like street and skate culture. And it's the articles want to feel more like conversations, more like little snapshots and an injection of inspiration. Because like going back to Instagram or any other thing that might take up your time, your time is limited. So you want, when someone is looking at something, for them to go, we've spent time putting together the best bits for them, hopefully. Because we can't compete with their whole archive online. Or, for example, we've got an article with Anita Klein in issue 20, and she's got a 40-year retrospective show at the Eames Fine Art Gallery in London. And we've worked with her a few times, on articles and various things. But Jo had such a lovely, the photographer, I couldn't make it to that interview, but she had such a lovely conversation with Anita, and they connected on such a printmaking way. It was so different to like, and we're doing the same here, hopefully. It's just conversational based stuff. And we want, we do try hard to keep that tone in there.
Yeah.
Because, and I think one last thing on this, actually, and I think I do it myself when I read other magazines, in contrast to let's say the internet rather than just Instagram, is that I think you bring something of yourself to it more. Like when you're stopped, you've got a cup of tea, you're like, you are having a bit of a moment, even if it's like just not even reading it, but just skipping the pages and go, someone put this together with love, or like, it just feels like, and that's why I've probably got a slight addiction to like books of artists I like, as well as the magazines, and I buy quite a lot of zines as well. I just love it when somebody spent a bit of time curating something. It's like, for me, it's always a bit like a mini gallery in some pages that I can keep.
Oh, I love that idea. I think that's really true. Yeah. And I also think that there's something for me, and I think probably for a lot of people, about the actual experience of buying something. I've spent money on this. Instagram is just free nonsense forever and ever and ever. You could consume images, I'm sure, every moment of your life and die not seeing everything that's out there, but it's all free. And then, the fact that like, okay, like I've exchanged money for goods. There's something about that happens psychologically that you're like, I'm treating myself, or I'm getting my money's worth out of it by having that moment. Yeah. And, while like the freedom and the accessibility of Instagram can be great in many ways, it's a very different experience than I'm making sure that I get what I paid for, which is great. Yeah.
We talked a bit off air a little bit just about, things like algorithms and the sort of whether it, is it worth having mastery on a system that's changing around you? But Rachel, my wife, made a really good point the other day, is that, all the things that are changing with Instagram, got every right to change because it's a free service to all of us. We aren't paying for it. So if it changes, it changes. We move to something else. That's a risk they run and we run using it. But yeah, when you've gone, right, well, I earn my money, I'm treating myself to this, or I have a subscription to that, or I'll pick this up. you know, yeah, you're invested.
Mm-hmm.
You're invested in some way. And I suppose what I try to do is put my sort of joy for the genre or the area of printmaking into the mag, and then hopefully, with enough care and attention, that sort of then feeds other people's. I get asked quite a lot about me as a printmaker, and I think it's quite hard for me to be a particularly good printmaker and also make the magazine, because I see so many other people's work. It's almost, and it must be the same in some ways with you, the podcast, and maybe other people who, curate things, I suppose. But I guess I'm featuring 15, 20, 30 projects every issue that I and a few others think is the best work going on. And then to look at your own stuff in context to that and go, oh man, it's just, I'm such a magpie when it comes to influences for the magazine, that when I come to do stuff, it's way more, oh, how did they do that? I want to try it, so I've, over the years, I've become much better at saying to myself, I just like experimenting, I like trying things, the things I've seen. Oh, how did they do that? I'll try that. That's the other thing. I'm massively in awe of artists who have a singular thing that they're looking at or way that they approach their work. And I guess you could flip that and say, well, the magazine is that for me, because I'm predominantly a graphic designer. But yeah, I also feel like if I didn't get my hands inky every once in a while, I feel a bit of a fraud.
Yeah, I could totally see that, that there's something important about the actual experience. You can't just sit up in an ivory tower and observe without the doing. Yeah. Do you have any sort of dreams for the magazine? I know we talked a little bit about this, but like things that if you had unlimited time, resources, energy, that you would love to see Pressing Matters be in 2 years, 5 years, that kind of thing.
You asking me if I have a business plan, are you? Never. Yeah, no, I do. And interestingly, I think that's become more post my sort of, the sort of medical stuff that I had earlier in the year. Fundamentally, for me, the magazine is about inspiring and educating people. So there's a few other ideas I've got outside of just selling more mags.
Right, yeah.
That interest me. I'm interested in spaces quite a lot. Like, how when you bring people together in spaces, conversations happen. And then when conversations happen, then things happen. And I think we talked about residencies earlier on, about visiting artists. I've got a bit of a dream space in my mind, and it's probably going to take a while for it to happen. But I can imagine a space that, let's say there is some kind of Airbnb set up where someone could come and stay. But I don't think it necessarily would end up being something in the pages of the magazine. But I think I kind of like this idea that, an artist could come and then show some stuff, and then we could do a little video of them.
Oh, cool.
And maybe the content could grow slightly outside the pages of the magazine and have a slightly different sort of, just a variety of formats that people could interact with. Also, like, just, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I'd love some sort of college that wasn't a school thing to happen out of it. Like, a lot of the people I know teach print, and it'd be great to bring all of that together in some kind of way where people could be quite experimental. I think if we could facilitate just more and more people to print more and more, to explore their ideas more and more. My friend Carl Middleton and I have, working on some ideas at the moment. And one of them's using sort of Lego with letterpress, sort of flat Lego.
Oh, nice.
Modular things. And it's just so good. You don't have to be able to draw. You can just put the blocks together. And if somebody says, oh, just do a face, do a self-portrait out of Lego, you can. You can just play. It's just play, and then you put ink on it and you get a print. And I think anything I will do or want to do will just hopefully still have that sort of red thread through it from the magazine into other areas. We did actually talk about podcasts at one point, me and Venka, because we actually had a period where we were doing Zooms for interviews. We had a lot of recordings of interviews.
Oh, yeah.
see, when you go through the process of writing it down and then putting it into a story in a magazine, it's shorter by a lot. But also, the way people say it in their own voice, as you'll find, and we are trying to explore in the mag, but in a podcast, it's really interesting to hear the person's voice and their accent and all those kind of things. And so, but I know my limits, certainly on my own. And so it's talking with you about that more could be interesting for the future. I think there's just so many people who are good at what they do. I think I'm quite good at doing the mag, and I'm quite happy sticking with that. But I'd love to see some of these ideas find a space, be it explore something that we're both excited about at your event in Santa Fe. So that's the thing for me, importance of keeping these relationships going. The guys at Woolwich Print Fair are always really generous and say, "Oh, it'd be great if you could have some print happening," and we always want that to be going on. So yeah, as Martin, who you worked with recently, the Open Press Project, is my buddy. He's always there with us at some of these fairs, and Sula.
He was wonderful, yeah.
So yeah, I think at the moment I'm doing things that I want to be doing, but in a small way based on the energy and time I have. But I think the sort of the intent is there to explore maybe spaces and how do you do that kind of thing without being really full time on that as well? I don't know. And not have employees. I don't know how it works really, Miranda.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way because I have so many different ideas constantly about projects that would be fun to do. I just had Cami and Edie on from Newsprint Pod, and they do a wonderful job doing that. They do a monthly podcast that's about like the news of the print world, and it's very charming. And we had this idea of what if we were able to travel to a city and do in-depth podcasts, investigative style reporting podcast, more in the style of something like This American Life, where it's actually, rather than just an interview, it's this is the story of printmaking in Cleveland, or this is the story of printmaking in St. Louis, and how fun that would be. And I'm all jazzed about that idea. And then, as you say, all of those thoughts is like, how does that not become your full-time job? How do you work to sustain yourself to do the things that make money so you can do this? How do you do that without paying anyone? And it's sad sometimes, but there's also something so hopeful about that. And how I think part of the charm of the print world is that you find so many people here who are keen to take on something else just from this place of love and wanting to see it in the world. And I've never found that in other communities to the extent that it is in the print world, where it's just, you're doing a thing. I love that thing. How can I help your thing? Here's my thing. Do you want to do anything with it? And it's just this collaborative nature and this through line of enthusiasm and community that's so powerful and so exciting. And, if it's the only spaces in which I wish I just was, the heiress to, an emerald mine or something and didn't have to worry about money or time. I just think about the projects I could do, opening this space and starting that, like
you'd still be stressed about it all, and you have even more. I think for me, it's more, my health stuff's made me slow down a bit, but it's also made me right. There's a difference between if I employ someone to do social media, then we could sell a million more magazines or this, that, and the other. Not all this what ifs and could be's, but more like an idea is still a good idea. It just needs to find its place and space, and sometimes it's not me that makes that happen. And maybe that'll happen more in the magazine. Maybe I'll set off some ideas in the pages of the magazine and set them as challenges, or like more of these, we'll print challenges, but could, other people come together in a different way. So I think we're both definitely in the sort of right places to explore all of that.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any favorite stories or favorite features, if you're allowed to play favorites a bit as the editor, that you just like when it since 2017, it's been like, I'm so happy this was made. I'm so happy this is in the world.
Ones that pop out to me are, the issue that I felt, when issue 3 came out, it was... So issue 1 was very West Country, UK, Southwest, which is where I'm based. It was that, but then was the first Bone Shaker magazine. It was just the people we knew. The second one was like people who'd just heard of it, saying, "Oh, could I be in it? Could I do?" So it became quite international quite quickly. Issue 3 Like I think we featured Angie Lewin, maybe Anthony Burrell. There were 2 or 3 people who I was like, I've always, as a graphic designer, not a print person, but as a graphic designer, been really interested in, and they already were like, "This is great." About the magazine.
Wonderful.
So issue 3 was one of those ones, not particularly the stories, but the way that one came together was a real, and that was the second year, so I did 2 in the first year. So that was a real vote of confidence. It felt for me, 3rd issue, that I could at least do another 3, and keep going for the next year. Issue 6, we got to do a piece on John Pedder, who I've since become pretty good friends with. I designed his book, and just But even in that one, had the Black Women of Print. It had. I am looking this up, by the way, because it's not all kept in my head. But we had people like Super Mundane, who's a brilliant illustrator and designer. Print House, who have just printed our T-shirts. It's interesting. This was quite an early issue, but we're still working with them. Joe Stafford, who's part of the printmaking group in Norwich. So there's lots of people who were in, again, issue 6. That felt like an important one. I'm not going to be able to guess which issue it was in, but on a personal note, I've always been a big Radiohead fan, and so when we featured Stanley Donwood,
I remember that.
He said, let's just, because he doesn't want to fill in a Q&A, he was like, come and meet me. And he was based in Bath at the time, which is near Bristol.
Mm-hmm.
So myself and friend Mike, who actually was writer for Bone Shaker, he was also a fan. And so we're like, yeah. Well, we went to meet him, and his studio was so nice. And he was such a nice guy, but literally within 20 minutes, he was like, there's a great pub around the corner. So we were like, we get to go for a beer with Stanley Donwood. But even in that first 20 minutes, he was just showing us all these sheets of stickers he'd done with Radiohead, and like some of the original paintings that ended up in their artwork. And at the time, he was working on his lino cut book, which was a series of lino cuts, which is part of what we talked about in there. But I was really surprised, because I just thought of him as, as a painter mainly, but had done this kind of project and a few other things. But the more we talked to him, the more he'd done etchings, copper plate etchings, all this kind of stuff, really interested in it. And he was someone we, I think, managed to speak to because he knew Nick Hand from the Letterpress Collective, who I think was in issue 1, but also he's been a big, I don't want to embarrass him. I don't want to say hero, but he's just been someone who worked in the print world for a very long time in a really cool way. He was a graphic designer. He still is, has done some really interesting things with his time, And so, going back to your previous question, actually, I'd like things to go in that direction, which is just to sort of facilitate more print, more interesting projects, both for myself and the people involved in the mag. But yeah, definitely Stanley Donwood on a personal note was quite a fun one to do and be involved in.
Yeah, it was a great one. I remember it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
And I mean, I will say, I don't know when this will come out, whether it's before the next issue or not, but I'm excited to be talking to Kate Gibb, who back in the day did lots of artwork for the Chemical Brothers, but now she's just doing all kinds of stuff with, clothing, with, she does a lot of stuff with the Jealous Gallery in London. And her work's just fantastic, very, very much what I'm interested in at the moment personally, how you bring collage and the sort of, the errors that naturally come in printmaking or in sort of art making, how you can keep them special, particularly in something like screen printing, which, once you set it up, you can just do the same thing. How do you keep that interesting every edition? Is it moving it slightly? Is it making the colours jar? Is it? And so it's quite exciting to be talking to her for this new issue as well.
I'm very excited to read that for sure. And so we're just coming up already on our hour mark here. So it's time for me to ask, where can people find Pressing Matters? Where can they purchase it? Where can they follow it? Or can they get excited about it?
I would say that probably Instagram it's not, I don't stay on top of it every day. I used to do a lot more, but essentially all the things I'm interested in, all the things to do with the magazine when it comes out, etc., is always on Instagram. We also do a newsletter fortnightly. I say I have really enjoyed writing it myself, and I tend to put more sort of time-sensitive things in that and talk about when we release things like the T-shirts and things. So you can sign up to the newsletter via our website. And yeah, you can subscribe or just buy a single copy from our website. as well. We have quite a lot of copies in different stockists, but they're in lots of different countries, so it really depends where
it's
you
not
live.
the easiest to go to the website.
I will always encourage people to subscribe with us, because that's just, part of the business side of it. But
and I can speak to just
sure everyone knows, so we sell wholesale bundles to stockists, but actually a lot of print studios will buy them for their members and things like that, because there's a sort of discount if you buy 5 or 10 of them and things. So I'm interested in the business side of all of this, but also I get out of bed to design the magazine and tell the stories moreover. So people just check out Instagram and our website, and
and I can speak to, at least for me, the just in investing in a subscription and just paying the yearly fee more than pays for itself for me, in terms of just that little thrill when you open the mailbox or the post box and you're like, oh, it's here, and get to open it, and just it's just an experience that you don't get very much out in the world. I think in other ways, you really, that sort of opening a present feeling, I think, is really what it feels like. So I highly recommend doing it. That's great.
Thank you.
It's been really wonderful to chat, Joe. I really, like I said, I'm just really very, very happy that we were able to actually connect, because I've been an admirer of what you produce for so long and have really enjoyed working with you. And I hope we get to do so more and collaborate more. It would be great. Yeah.
Absolutely.
If you like today's episode, we have a Patreon where you can help us keep the lights on and get bonus content like Shop Talk Shorts, where our editor Timothy Pauschak digs deep on materials, processes, and techniques with past guests. Also, if monetary support isn't in the cards right now, you can leave a review for us on your podcast listening app of choice, or buy something from one of our sponsors and tell them Hello Print Friend sent you. But as always, the very best thing you can do to support this podcast is by listening and sharing with your fellow print friends around the world. And that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Chris Estrada, who runs Farewell Transmission, Instagram's best place for hand-printed t-shirts featuring bootleg music designs and naughty sentiments. We talk about how Chris manages to be so prolific with his designs, his musical influences, and building his own business on his own terms. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing by Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.